Hey everyone, and welcome to Microsoft Ignite. I hope most of you have had a good day. For others, like me who are just waking up, I'm sure there's a lot of other content we will get to watch. So we hope you guys stick by. We are really happy to have you guys join us from wherever you are in the world. You hope you have a fantastic time and you learn something new. My name is Khomelemo, and I lead advocacy for students and emerging markets for the Power Platform. Today, I'll be going through a Microsoft Learn module that shows us how to shape data in a Power Apps Canvas app. But before we start, let's actually take a look at the agenda for the next hour or so. So I'm just going to quickly introduce to you what exactly is the Power Platform as well as what are Power Apps. And then we will dive straight into the module, which is exactly what you guys came here for. So like I said, the module is called Shape Data in a Power Apps Canvas app, and you can access this module at aka.ms/learn/PowerAppsShapeData. We would like this period to be as interactive as possible. So if you want to follow along, that's great. But if you just want to sit back and watch, that is also fine. At the end, we'll then have time to answer any questions that you might have, but please feel free to ask questions at any time. We have a powerful team of moderators behind the scenes who will be answering questions via the Teams live events Q&A, which you can find in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Please note as well that these sessions will be recorded, and so you can watch these on demand at any time, and the recordings will be available a few days after the conference. Okay, so for those of you who might not know, the Power Platform is empowering millions of people, both technical and non-technical, to achieve more power with less code. Microsoft recognizes that there are not enough coders, data scientists, and all-round quote-unquote tech professionals to go around in the world. So their goal was to build a platform targeting not only these tech experts, but also the millions of other frontline workers who see opportunities every day to create something better than the status quo. But due to a lack of expertise in a specific field, they have never been empowered to do anything about it. So the Power Platform implements this vision via its cloud-based services of Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, as well as Power Virtual Agents. Now, with our focus of the session being on Power Apps, Power Apps is a low-code app development platform allowing anyone to build web and mobile apps with very little code. The natural connection between Power Apps and the rest of the platform makes it effortless to put insights into the hands of maintenance workers, teachers, miners, bus drivers, and other people on the front line. In tailored and often task-specific apps that supercharge their productivity and make their work perhaps a little less tedious. So that's just the basic overview of what Power Apps is. So with that, I think it'll be a good time now to actually dive straight into our module. Like I said, you can find that at aka.ms/learn/PowerAppsShapeData. But before we go there, I'm just gonna take you to this Power Apps Makerspace, Power Apps Studio. You know, there's so many names for this place, but it's basically just a sort of a one-stop shop for all things related to Power Apps. This is where we build our Power Apps. So to access this page, you would need to go to make.powerapps.com, and this will take you to this page. But then if you haven't logged in, it's going to ask you to log in with either a student or business account. Now, if you don't have any of these accounts, the question is, can you still use Power Apps? And the answer to that is yes. What you can do is you can take your personal email address and sign up for a free business account, and attach that to a Microsoft 365 developer subscription trial, which you will then be given access to various parts of the platform like Power Apps. So how would you go about doing that? So a friend of mine who actually works on the same team as I do created an article, which you can find at aka.ms/PA for Power Apps test environment, aka.ms PA test environment. And in this article, he goes through the various steps that you need to create your free business account and your Microsoft 365 developer subscription, which will then give you a trial to use Power Apps. So this article is great because it goes through everything, it walks you through, and at the end of this, you should then be able to log into that same screen that I logged into earlier on. So this is a great resource for those just starting out. So like I said, this is the studio makerspace, one-stop shop for everything Power Apps. And basically, for the most part, you do not need to have to leave this space when building your app. You can build apps with things like AI Builder to put AI capabilities into your apps. You can have chatbots via the use of virtual agents, and you can also connect some flows. This is through Power Automate, which is another part of the platform. But the focus is, especially for now, is around this section here, the data, right? What's really great about Power Apps is that it allows us to build very robust apps while connecting to your existing business data. And that's a really great thing about Power Apps. So there are three main ways of creating Power Apps. I'm just going to go to this create button here, and then we'll see the first way is you can start from blank. You can, if you want to build your app from the ground up, then this is a great place to start. This is for people who are more seasoned in the Power Apps world. And then over here, you can also start your app from data. And this goes back into what I said earlier, where Power Apps is able to connect to your business's existing data. And that's a really powerful tool that we'll talk a little about later on. And then you can also start from a template. This is great for those of you who have never used Power Apps and you want to get started. You can go right in and choose one of these amazing templates here that have been built by people at Microsoft as well as people in the Power Platform community. A really good favorite of mine when it comes to these templates is this Power Apps training one. Basically what this is a Power App that teaches you how to build Power Apps. So you go in, you run the app, and it will provide step-by-step instructions on using certain parts of the Power Apps Studio. Like it will show you how to add a button, how to change the text, that kind of thing. And this is all within the app. So everything, you can go at your own pace and everything is in one place. So that's a really great resource, especially if you're just starting out. So let's close this here. And then what we're going to do is today we're going to walk through a Microsoft Learn module, which is here. Again, aka.ms/Powerapps/shapedata. That's how we get here. And a module in Microsoft Learn, for those of you who don't know, Microsoft Learn is this really great resource for learning about how to leverage some of Microsoft's coolest technologies, right? It's these self-paced step-by-step guides on how to use certain tech, and they're all tailored towards either a certain role, like if you want to learn about being a developer or an architect or a systems admin, there are learning modules and learning parts tailored to that. Or if you want to learn about a certain technology like Azure or .NET or the Power Platform, then there are modules and learning parts related to that. So this is a learning module, which is a part of a bigger learning path. Basically, a learning path is a collection of learning modules that all sort of teach you about the same kind of topic. So in this learning path, it talks about working with data. And then the module that we'll be doing is the shaping data in a Power Apps Canvas app. So that is Microsoft Learn, and that is where we'll be for the rest of this session. So like I said, today we're going to be learning how to shape data in a Power Apps Canvas app. And basically, the premise of this module is when you're building apps, most of the time you're always working with data. And you need to be mindful of who can see the data and when, because sometimes as a user, not all the data will be relevant to me at that time. I may only want to see certain bits at a time. A very simple use case is if you take a school, you have the staff and you have the students. And while these groups of users might be using the same system, they're not always going to be looking at the same data. So we're going to be learning about the various functions that help us to shape the data. We'll be looking at that later on. The only prerequisite of this module is that you have a basic understanding of creating a Power App. That's all you need to know. And then let's actually dive right into that. Okay. So we'll be talking a little bit about filtering, right? So like I said, when you work with data, not all the data needs to be present all the time to all users, right? I only need to see the data that's relevant to me. So there's certain functions, for example, filter, there's also search, and these functions provide a more focused view of the information for specific users. What's really great about these functions is that it also processes and returns a small section of the data source. It doesn't bring in the whole data source. So the app itself doesn't have to process all the data all the time, which, as you can imagine, improves performance of the apps. So filter is basically a small function that allows you to only return a certain set of records from a data source that fits a specific condition. And we'll be using that in an exercise later on. When we're talking about the search function with filter, that's a more solid, more rigid way of filtering the data. And that's basically, that is on the perspective of the developer. Maybe I want to show specific data to a specific type of user. But with search, this is a more flexible way to create a query against your data source. And with this, it puts the power into the hands of the user themselves. Maybe I want to search for a specific name or a specific city. This function will come in handy for that. And the search function is very easy to use, but it's very powerful in terms of what it can do with your data. And we'll see that in our exercise later on. Sometimes when you have more complex use cases, you might want to think about combining certain functions to meet the demands of your business or of your use case, right? An example of this is combining the previous functions that we've just talked about, search and filter, right? And we will see how those two functions can work together and how easy it is for you to shape your data using those functions. Right, and then we're going to also be talking about a concept called collections. Collections are like a variable that you can use, right? It's only a place to temporarily store your data while you're using the app itself. And a very common use case is when you think about like a store or some internal equipment ordering system that your business has, right? When we work with carts and cart data, you want the user to be able to store certain records without actually modifying the original data source, right? I'm with the cards, I can add products, I can remove them, I can edit them, I can do all sorts of things, but I would like for the user to be able to do those things without modifying the original data source. And that's where collections come in. And collections come with a bunch of functions, and a few of them are these four here, which we will then see how exactly they work in our exercise going forward. Okay, now it's time for us to get right into our exercise. But before we do that, I'm just gonna see if there are any questions for me to answer. So what I'll do is I'll come here in the chat. Okay, there are no questions right now. Please feel free at any time to ask questions in the Q&A window. We do have a team of moderators who will answer them for you. But if they have questions that need my attention, then I will be happy to answer them as well. So let's just dive straight into our exercise. So what I'll do is I'm just gonna make this, just minimize this a bit so we can work with it in our workspace. Let's come back to Power Apps. Let's put that there. Okay, that's great. So if we look at our exercise, there's one thing we need to do before we work with this exercise here. You will need to download this spreadsheet to use it as a data source for our app. Now, I've spoken a little bit about data and a data source and how that works in an app, but how can we connect to our data in a Power Apps Canvas app? So as you guys know, data is at the core of most apps, including those you build in Power Apps. Your data is sometimes stored, or most of the time stored, in a data source, and you bring that data into Power Apps by creating a connection, right? The connection uses a specific connector to talk to your data source. Now, Power Apps allows you to gives you access to a number of different connectors by many popular services for you to bring in your data source. These connectors include Sharepoint, SQL Server, Office 365, Salesforce, Twitter, and so many other things. Even Azure. If you're a pro dev and you want to bring in Azure SQL database, you can do that as well. So for the focus of this session, our data source will be an Excel spreadsheet. So we will then be using the Excel connector to connect to that data source, right? Power Apps itself also has the common data service, or CDS, which is kind of like entity based. So if you're familiar with SQL Server and how they have the entity based tabular structure, you will then find the common data service very pleasant to use. Okay, so let's actually download the spreadsheet so we can use it as a data source. What I'll do is I'll right click and open up this link. And what that does is it'll open up a GitHub page where we can then download the data source. Now, we need to take note that the data source will be downloaded as a zip file, right? So as a zip file, we need to go into that and actually extract the folder from that zip file. And then inside the folder, there's an Excel spreadsheet. It's just a table with data. And this is the table that we will then use as a data source. If you can see here, it's just there's a name, description, price, unit sold, origin, and an image. This image is a blob which is stored in this case on GitHub. So now that we have our Excel sheet, which will serve as our data source, the next step we need to do is we need to then upload this data sheet to OneDrive. So we'll open up our OneDrive account and we'll just upload that sheet over here, right? Now that it's inside our OneDrive account, we'll be able to use the OneDrive for Business connector to connect to this data source. Now, one thing to note is the OneDrive account that you've logged in to upload your data source needs to be the same account, the same business or school account that you used to log in to Powerapps. That's very important, or else you won't be able to see the data that you want to work with. So what we'll do is let's go back to Powerapps and let's start creating our application. Okay. So the first part of this is adding a data source. So we've signed into Powerapps. We're going to be creating a new Powerapps app from blank and call it shape data. Let's actually copy that and we're going to come back here. So again, I went to the create Canvas app from blank. We'll call it shape data. We'll use the tablet format and then we'll click on create. All right, and this is just going to provision for us a space for us to create our Powerapps, and then we'll be able to drop in certain components like buttons, text boxes, galleries, lists, tables, and so on. Okay, so this is what that space looks like. And the next step is then we need to connect our data source and add it into our app. So let's actually do that now. So what we'll do is we're going to insert a gallery. We'll choose the vertical one and just have it, we'll place it here on the side. Don't worry about making it look good, right? We have that gallery, and a gallery is just a vessel or a component that helps us to display data in a very nice way. So we have that there. And then on the right here in our properties pane, under data source, we'll just open up this drop-down list. And in the search box here, we're gonna search for OneDrive for Business. And that's the connector that we'll be using to connect to our data source. We'll click on OneDrive for Business. We'll come here and click on connect, right? And basically that's going to be connecting to the OneDrive account, which is associated with this business, the business account. It's going to then ask you to choose an Excel file. This is the one that we uploaded earlier on. And then it's going to scan that Excel file and look for any tables which are in it. And the table that I showed you earlier on is called items. So we'll just check that and then we'll bring that in by connecting there. So as that's connecting, that's just going to slowly come in to the app, and it's going to display the data here on our gallery. Okay, so it's a basic, so it's it sort of reads the data source and it sort of tries to put the data in certain places on the gallery. Like here we see the description is on top, the name is here, and the image, because it knows that it's a blob, it has the image already put on the side here. Right, well, we know what the data looks like. This might not make sense to a user using the app for the first time, so we will be configuring this to change this a bit. But just by following those few steps, we have now added a data source into our app. So the next part of this is to format the data in our gallery, right? So we're just doing these first few steps just to configure the app quite a bit, and then we'll then start using some of the functions that we talked about. So let's actually format this. What we do is we click on the gallery, and then under layout, we're gonna open up this, and then we're not gonna choose that one. We're gonna choose this last one here: image, title, subtitle, and body. Basically, we want the gallery to provide more context for the user so they understand the data that they're working with. And then once that is in, we'll come back here to fields, we'll edit the fields, and then according to the exercise, this is the format that we'll be going for. So the body needs to tell us about the description. The image, will leave it as is. Subtitle, let's go for the unit price, and then title will have name. Okay, so just click this X here next to data, and then now that makes a bit more sense. But then as a user, I'm going to come and I'm going to look at these numbers and I'm not going to know what they are. So let's actually edit this to give more context to the user. So we'll come back to our exercise, and we have a formula here that we'll use. So let's copy that, come back to our gallery, and then click on the price, and then we'll replace this with this particular expression over there. Now we'll see that all of them now have that $sign. So as a user, I know that this value is talking about a price. So what we did was we have some text, and the reason why I say it's text is because it's in between these symbols here. It's the $sign, the ampersand, and this item.unit price. So what the ampersand does is it just joins these two values together. And this item refers to the current, or the current record in the data source. So this item.unit prices, whatever record we are on, you want to show that unit price. Another thing I want to point out is when I'm editing everything else, I'm not clicking the first or the second or the other rows in our data source. I'm always within the first row. And the reason for that is because the first row acts as a template for all the other rows in our gallery. So for example, in our first row, if I were to move this to the left here, all the other arrows would also move. So if you want to change the way the data is shown, always interact with the first row, and then everything will just follow up. One more thing I wanted to add is maybe this image. It's a bit small. I wanted to fill the space. So for image position, I'm going to click that and then click on fill, and then that kind of looks better because now it fills up the space and it looks good. Okay, so with that, we have added a data source and we've configured the data in that data source. And now we'll be using the functions that we talked about earlier on, filtering and search, to shape the data that we have. So I'm just going to look for any questions that we might have on my side. Let's see. So we have two questions here. And the first one is from Anonymous. how many records you could have in collections? Is there a maximum limit? So as far as I know, I don't think that there's a limit at all. Because remember, if you have a data source, a massive data source, because with this Excel sheet, we only have 3, but you could be working with data sources of over 1,000 records, and you want to interact and play with those files. So I don't think that there's a limit into what you can have in a collection at all. The next question we have here is from Sahana. Sorry if I've mispronounced your name, but if the majority of application users like to access the app through the browser on their computer and not only from mobile, is it the Canvas app that needs to be created or the Portal app? For this one, I'm not too sure about Portal apps, but with Canvas apps can be created both for the mobile and the web, so that is fine. As for the Portal app, maybe we can bring up Greg to answer this question. Greg is actually one of the moderators on this call, and he actually works on the Power Platform team. So I think we can have Greg come in and speak about this for a little bit. So let's go there.
Thanks, Homo. Just to address that real quick. The Powerapps portals are for external users for your application, right? So Powerapps Canvas applications can only be used by people that are licensed inside your tenant to use Powerapps. But if you have external customers or external partner companies that you're working with, they might not have an account on your tenant. So Powerapps portals are a way to expose that data to them and maybe gather data from them in the case of, say, maybe trouble tickets or customer support chats, things like that, and get that data into your system. Powerapps portals are very different than Canvas Powerapps, but they all can be part of one single app strategy that you have if you're putting that together and external users are part of your situation. That said, just to answer the initial question, you can use Powerapps Canvas apps just inside a web browser. You don't need a mobile device to use them. They'll just be behind a Microsoft 365 login for your organization. Homo, back to you.
Cool. Awesome. So now with that, we're gonna come back to our application here. So we've configured the data source, we've played around with the data in the galleries. Now let's actually talk about using those functions that we talked about earlier on. So filter. So what we're going to do is let's quickly copy this formula here. And what we usually do is we click on the gallery to select the entire thing. And we need to make sure that the items property is selected in our formula bar here on top. And then this items property represents the data source in which this specific gallery takes its data from. As we saw earlier on, the name of that table in the Excel spreadsheet is conveniently named items. If your table is called students, or whatever it may be, that table name will be in the space over here. So let's paste in that expression that we had from the exercise. And we'll note that now only 2 records are showing up in our gallery. And this is because based on the condition set in our filter function, these are the only 2 records that match that condition. Right, so let's take a look at filter. We have the filter function, and then the next property is obviously the data source. Where are we filtering this data source from, this data from? And then we have our condition, or like Powerapps likes to call it the logical test, right? This is the condition that we'll be filtering some data on. So basically we are saying that we only want to show the records that have an origin which matches China. And this is cool, like for, let's just say that school use case that I had earlier on, where you'd only want to show data if the user is a staff member, right? So this is a really cool and powerful function to use. But now, sometimes you might have more complex use cases, more complex conditions to meet when working with bigger apps. And what you can do is you can use these operators within the filter functions themselves. One of which is the AND operator. So let's go back to our exercise here and let's copy this and bring this back and copy this over. Now we have this AND operator here, and there's a second condition, right? And now with the AND, the records that are returned need to meet both conditions. They can't just meet one or the other. So this is for more complex use cases. So going back to the example of the school, maybe you want to say you want to have them be staff, but then their level should be maybe lecturer, right? Because there might be lecturers, there might be presidents, there might be dean, faculty deans, and so on. So this provides you for more complex use cases there. So with the operators, there's and there's or, right? With or, the conditions need to meet one or the other. They don't have to meet both for it to actually work. Another thing to take note when working with operators in the filter function and anywhere else within Power Apps is the casing of the and. Some people use a lowercase and that might not work because Power Apps only recognizes the capital letter and the capital letter A for those operators. So let's actually bring the entire data set back, right? Writing items. So now that's the whole data set back. And then we'll move on to working with the search function. With search, like I said earlier on, it provides the users a more flexible way of querying the data source. They can enter in something and the records would return based on the search that the users have put into the text box. So we actually need something for the user to write out their query. So we'll come here to insert, we'll go to input, then we'll have text input. So let's just expand this a bit. Let's maybe increase the size a little. Okay. And then what I'll do is on the right hand side in this properties pane, I'll set the default text. I'll just remove that so it's clear. Okay. Now that we have our text box, I'm going to do something I've never done. I'm going to rename this input box here, and that input box, well, the name at least can be found on the left side under this tree view where all your components are actually listed. So we'll right click there and then we'll rename that to search input. Now, renaming your components is a very crucial part of any type of app that you build. When you be building more fleshed out apps, you will find that you have multiple components that are the same. So multiple galleries, multiple buttons, multiple inputs. So you might want to consider renaming them so it's easier for you to refer to them later on. And that's exactly what we'll be doing now when we copy this function out. And then we'll come back here. We're going to go to the items property there, and then we'll just paste that search function there. Let's actually break down what we have done. So we have used the search function here, right? And the search function is searching within the items data source, right? And then it's going to take whatever is typed into this input here, I've referred to it by name. So search input.text, that period is like it's a accessor, right? I'm accessing the text that is within that input box. So search input.text, so whatever the user has put into the text box, we're going to use that and then run it against the name property or the name column. So in simple terms, we're going to use what the user has put in the input box, and we're going to search all the names based on that search. Let's actually run this, which you can do by clicking on this play button here on the top right. So let's search this. Let's test this out by typing mint, right? And that brings up the mint box. Then we can do that. That brings up this as well. Then you'll also notice with search, we don't have to worry about casing, right? I can have capital M, I can have a small m, it'll still bring it back. When I don't have anything within our search box, all the records come back, and search function also gives you the use of partial searches. So if I have IN, then 2 records would come back in the way of mint and cinnamon, because both of these names have IM. So with just that simple function, you can do quite a bit for your users. So what if I want to search multiple columns, not just the name? I want to search the name, the price, the description, anything, right? Can I search more than one column at one time, or do I need to use a separate function from that? And the answer is yes. You can search multiple ones at the same time, and all you need to do is you need to append the name of the column or the name of the property next to the name, right? So if I want to search 5 columns, I just write their names all at the end. I just append it to the end, and your search will then look for matches in all of those columns. If I were to press play here and I were to have mint, obviously this matches the name, but it's also looking in the description, and I can prove that by saying flavoring, right? So that is not in any of the names, but it is in the descriptions. So that will also come up with that as well. And again, if I search in, which is that partial search that we did the last time, mint comes back, cinnamon comes back, but there's nothing here in the name, but you'll notice that it is in the description box over there. So you can search multiple ones at the same time, and that's a really powerful tool, a really powerful function to know how to use. Now, sometimes you might have a very complex business system. Maybe you're working with all sorts of data with many types of users, and you need to make more complex, more fledged out data shaping functions. You can actually join certain functions to meet your business needs. In this case, we'll be joining filtering and search, but there are many other use cases where you could join functions to fledge out more complex use cases. So an example of this is combining the search and the filter functions into one. So let's actually come here and copy this filter function that we used earlier on, and we're going to replace the items property in search with that filter function. And now you'll note that only the 2 records that match this condition are brought back, and then as a user, I will be able to search within those 2 records alone, or within the records that match this filter part here. So the reason why that works is when you have the search function, right, that second part there is a data source. You're returning this data source. So with filter does the same thing. Filter also returns a data source, but filter returns an incomplete data source. In this case, it's only returning all the records in that source that match this condition. And that is why filter and search works so well together, because the filter function is able to meet the requirements of the search function by providing a data source for users to search within. Okay, so that's how you can use that to combine those types of functions. So with that, we can then move on to using collections within our apps. Greg, do we have any questions so far as I set this up? No questions at the moment. That is great. So let's actually come back over here. So now we will be working with collections. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a button. So how we add that is, how we do that is we're going to go to insert, we'll go to button. Let's add that down here. Then let's change this text to add to collection. Add to collection. Let's have that there nice and big. And this button, we wanted to do something, right? If we take notes in our formula bar here, this property that is chosen is on select, and the value is false, meaning that when I play this app and when I click this button, nothing is going to happen because it's false, right? What we need to do is we need to then copy this. Let's bring it back to the button here, and then we have that simple function there. And basically what this means is this collect function allows us to create a collection to be used. And remember, a collection represents a data source, but it's not the actual data source. It's a copy of the data that we can manipulate within the Power Apps in that session, right? It's temporary. So with collect, we are creating a collection called items collection, and we are going to be copying the data from the items data source, right? We're copying everything in the items data source and we're putting it into the items collection. And then we can manipulate and use that data any way we want without actually modifying the actual data source. So let's actually see how that works out. Let's play the app, let's click, and there's nothing, right? Nothing has nothing is going on because collections work in the background and we actually haven't used that in any way in our app. But how do we know that it has worked? How do we know that the collection has been made? On the top here, if you go to view and you go to collections, then we'll be able to see that items collections has indeed been created. And we can see if we took note of the Excel spreadsheet that I showed you earlier on, it's an exact replica of that data set. And we can manipulate this, we can delete columns, we can rename them, we can add, we can do whatever to this collection without modifying the original data source. So let's just go back here and we'll see the other functions that that come with the collections. So let's do something new. We're going to be adding a new screen, a new blank screen to our app. So we have a fresh screen to work with. And this time we're going to be adding a data table instead of a gallery. So let's actually add that up to the top here. Great. And now what it's doing is it's going to ask for a data source, which we can get from here. Now, because we have already connected the items data source earlier on, it's showing up here in our list, but also because items collection represents a data source in some shape or form, we can actually have that become our data source for this table here. So it looks like it's an exact replica of our data source, but we can manipulate the data without actually modifying our data source. Tables work a bit differently, where we need to manually add in the fields that we want, which is cool because we don't have to add everything. In this case, we'll just add all of these and have them there. Right, so that's over there. And remember, this data set, while it mimics the data source, it is not the actual data source. Now, the next thing we'll do is we're going to be adding 4 buttons, the same way we added them earlier on. Insert and then button. So let's have that here. Let's put that all up, just have that there. And then each of these buttons will then represent the 4 main functions of collections, right? The first function will be add. The next one will be to drop. Oops, sorry. Will be to drop. This one will be to rename. And then the last one, which I've actually just take a look. We have add, drop, rename, show. The last one will then be show. So these represent the 4 main functions of collections, and we'll show you what they actually do. So for add, what we'll do there, we'll copy this formula here. We'll click on add, which we've done. We'll go to the formula bar and add that expression in. So let's actually break this down. What have we actually done, right? So with add, we are creating a collection called add collection. And we're going to be using the add columns function to add a new column called revenue, right? Now we can't just add a column and not give it data, right? Where's this data coming from? Because this column is brand new. It's not in the original data source. So this revenue column is going to be made up with this formula, right? It's going to take the unit price and it's going to multiply that by the unit sold, right? These are existing columns or existing properties within our data source. And that is how we're going to make up the data for this new column called revenue. Then we'll do the other function, which is for drop. Let's copy that. Let's put that in. Same way. Now with drop works a little differently. Drop deletes one of the columns in your collection, right? So in this case, we're creating a collection called drop collection, and then we are deleting, the unit price column or the unit price property, right? So all the unit prices in that data source will be gone in the collection, not the data source, right? Then the next one we have is the rename. So let's copy that. With rename, what we'll do is the same thing, right? We have collect, we're creating a collection called rename, and we're using the rename columns function to rename the name column in our data source to product, right? Name is too generic. We want to use something that is more recognizable for the types of users for this app, right? So we're renaming that to product. Again, I need to emphasize that this is within the collection itself and not the actual data source. Okay, and the last one we have is show, right? With show works a bit differently. Maybe you want to show the user certain columns. You don't want to show them everything. So with collect, again, we're creating a collection called show collection, and we're using the show columns function to only show all the values in the name column or in the name property. That's the only thing we have. So we'll play this out and we'll actually click each button once. It doesn't do anything right now because we haven't actually used it within the app. But then you can think about some of the use cases that these might work for. And let's actually see what the collections look like based on the functions that we have. So we have the original items one. Then we have add, right? With add, remember what we did was we added a new one called revenue, and we calculated those values based on the unit price and the unit sold. Okay. With drop, we deleted the unit price collection. Right, with drop, we deleted the unit price collection, which I can't see over here. With the rename, we renamed the name column to products. So that's the change there. Remember in items, it was name, but over here it's called the product. And then in show, we're only showing the properties under the name column, right? So that's basically how collections work. It's in the background of the app for you as the developer to use how you please without actually interacting and modifying the original data source. So once I leave the session, all those collections will clear, and then the next user that comes in and they play with the app, it will make new ones for them in that session at the time. So before I close here, because that brings us to the end of the exercise, it has shown us how we can use some of those functions. Let's actually see some questions that we have on the module itself, right? The correct syntax for a function in Power Apps where you would like to match records if either a formula is true, right? If either formula is true, not both, one or the other. So it's obviously or. And then the correct syntax is the second one, because remember, I said that you need to note the case of that or operator there in the middle. Okay. Which of the following functions allow you to modify the columns of your table only within Power Apps? So that's the add columns function over there. See, you're modifying the table only within Power Apps, not the actual data source itself. Then the last one, if the search string is blank, what records are returned? By default, all the records are returned for that specific search. And with that, we've come to the end of the session here. Just a quick note of what we've done is we've worked with certain functions like filter and search to shape the data itself. We've used operators to combine some of these functions for more complex use cases. And we've learned how to work with collections to work with data within the Power Apps itself without modifying our original data source. So with that, I'm just going to go here to the chat to see if there are any questions that haven't been answered yet. And I can see that there's nothing for me right now. Oh, here's a question here. So we'll have, can my data source be a list from a SharePoint site or an O365 group site? And the answer is absolutely yes. Your data source SharePoint is one of the connectors. And actually what's cool is that a lot of people creating Power Apps today come from a SharePoint background. That's actually one of the popular connectors on Power Apps, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Greg?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Most of the usage we have in Power Apps right now comes from SharePoint, and it's because of the free SharePoint or the free Power Apps license that comes with many Office 365 and Microsoft 365 licenses.
Sure. Any other questions?
We have one more that just came in. Somebody's asking,
Okay.
can they use a Power App to modify permissions to a SharePoint list or file?
To modify permissions? I'm not too sure about that. I think, Greg, do you have an answer for that?
I haven't seen it for permissions specifically.
Yeah.
You might be able to create a custom connector that calls the appropriate SharePoint APIs to do that. But I think the SharePoint connector is really just mostly around getting the data in and out, not about kind of the metadata with security and all that.
For sure. Yes. So again, to note that once that article that I showed you earlier on, at aka.ms/PA test environment, this will show you how from your personal email address, you can then set up a business account. You can set up your Microsoft 365 developer trial subscription, and then you can actually use Power Apps for free, right? Certain connectors might not be available because of they're only in the premium package, but you can use some of them on a trial basis, like AI Builder, which we showed you which I showed you. I talked a little bit on earlier on. Is a really great way to incorporate AI capabilities into your app. That's a premium one, but then you can use that on a trial basis if you want to learn about that as well. Some resources for learning about Power Apps in this portal. If you go to the Learn side and you just click on this Get Started button here, this will take you to a whole list of learning parts and modules that are related to Power Apps. So there's a bunch of resources to get you guys started with creating your Canvas apps. Okay, and with that, I think we've come to the end of the session. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining in and for interacting with us. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your Ignite. Cheers.